Just a second. Okay. Now I will come back to the where. Yeah. Now the second poem that you have is about George. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. The second poem is an elegy. Elegy, all of you know, is a poem which mourns the death of somebody. It laments the death, passing away of somebody. That is called an elegy. Now, this is a portrait of Reverend George Whitfield. Just a second. Now, Whitfield, this is a phonetic transcription. I put it so that you will not pronounce it as Whitefield. Okay, it's pronounced as Whitfield. 1714.
Parimala Garu, mute your device.
Galaxy J2. Excuse me. See, yeah, thank you. Why am I not allowed to mute others? Okay. Who is the host here? Okay, this PGRRCDE is the host. So yesterday I could mute others. Today, why am I not allowed? Maybe they will mute me also, right? Okay. Well, now George Whitfield is a very important name in the history of American religion, colonies. And George Whitfield is an Englishman. And you must remember that this much history we are all familiar with. Till 1776, the colonies in America were a part of the British Empire, right? We all know that the revolution came because they wanted to be separate from the British crown. Many wars were fought, okay? The French and the British and the Indians, the British and the colonials, okay? So this history is something that you need to be familiar with. And George Whitfield, along with Charles Wesley and John Wesley. Some of you are familiar, okay? I think John Wesley and Charles Wesley, they are the founders of what is called Methodism in England. Now, those of you are familiar with Hyderabad would know that there is a Methodist church in Abbots, Chapel Road it's called, where you have Stanley School, Stanley College, Stanley, Sujata School, Little Flower High School, okay? They are all in the same place. Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So Methodist church, you have a Methodist church there, and you have Wesley Girls, Wesley Boys School, Wesley Junior College, Wesley Degree College, right? In Hyderabad, Farid, you're all familiar with Secunderabad. So in Secunderabad, you have the Wesley. Now, Methodism is a very important movement within the Anglican Church in the 18th century. John Wesley and Charles Wesley, both of these brothers, were the founders of this movement. They were appealing to the individual consciousness, not an organized religion, but salvation is something that is individual, and you need to, be saved. Because they were very planned and very methodical in their approach. The term Methodism stuck. Okay. Now, John Wesley also came to America. John Wesley's statue is there in Savannah. Savannah is a very important port city in Georgia. It's far from Atlanta. Okay. Yeah. Savannah is now you have the statue of John Wesley. Now, John Wesley statue, a big statue you have there. Okay. I was very happy to, see the statue of Wesley, John Wesley there. Now, along with John Wesley, George Whitfield is remembered more than anyone else for having, initiated what is called the evangelical revival in America. This is also called the Great Awakening. In American history, this is called Great Awakening. The evangelicals, especially the southern part of America, they are evangelical. Some of these regions are also called, it's called the Bible Belt, okay? The mostly southern states. George Whitfield was mostly, he was working in many colonies, okay, in the New England, but he also was stationed in Georgia. Georgia, one of the youngest colonies at that time. And, the evangelicals played a very important role in the culture of America because they sought to include every person in conversion, regardless of gender, race, and status. This is a very important egalitarian principle of the evangelicals. Now, Whitfield preached at least 18,000 sermons to perhaps 10 million listeners, both in Britain and American colonies. Now, see, you must understand that Whitfield was also a friend of Benjamin Franklin. Of course, Benjamin Franklin was not a very religious, man of religious persuasion, but he remained friends with George Whitfield. And Whitfield, Benjamin Franklin conducted a kind of an empirical experiment that when people said that when George Whitfield could speak and large crowds could hear, and in his estimate, 30,000 people could hear the voice of Whitfield. And that was an amazing feat. So Whitfield is remembered for his sermons in Great Britain as well as in American colonies. However, Whitfield, in spite of his very, very powerful messages and sermons, he himself owned slaves and plantations. This is a contradiction. Whereas John Wesley denounced slavery, Whitfield saw that slaves should be treated well, but slavery is necessary. That's what was his argument. And slavery was outlawed in Georgia in 1735. And Whitfield found it very difficult to maintain the orphanage. Now, Bethesda orphanage in Georgia, which he thought of, which he thought would set an example of the humane treatment of Black people. And he was successful in convincing the legislatures, and then slaves were allowed to settle in Georgia. His letter, now he wrote a letter to the planters of South Carolina, Virginia, and Maryland, chastising them for their cruelty to their slaves. So George Whitfield had a great influence on the religious, spiritual life of America. At the same time, he upheld slavery. He did not say that slavery should not be there like John Wesley. And he only sought a benign, kind treatment of the slaves, and for which, the the University of Pennsylvania, because, you know, his charity house is a part of the University of Pennsylvania complex. Okay. So University of Pennsylvania is also called Penn State. Okay. University of Pennsylvania announced that his statue would be removed from the campus because of his connection to slavery. This is as recent as 2020. 2020, the news is that, you know, the university has decided whether it's pulled down or not. I do not know, because when Trump was there, there was a lot of controversy when they pulled down a lot of statues. Why did they pull down many statues in America in last 2-3 years? Because they had connections to slavery. Are you able to understand this? So Whitfield also has an ambivalent relationship with slavery. Have I made these points clear?
Yes, sir.
Now, in this elegy on George Whitfield, you can read it on your own. Why did Phyllis Wheatley, a black slave girl, she was still a slave at the time when she wrote it, why did she write a poem about George Whitfield? Because 2 reasons. One is the spiritual effect of Whitfield's teachings. When America was, you know, she mentions in a poem that there was, you know, blood in the streets, there was violence, there was, you know, lawlessness, drunkenness. So Whitfield exerted a great influence on the religious, spiritual conscience of America, the colonial America. That is before 1776. And she praises him for that. She calls him a saint, right? And she, you know, speaks on behalf of Americans. What can America, you know, do for Whitfield? And she also says that Americans feel that they are orphaned. Orphaned, you know? Orphan, who is an orphan? Yatim, okay? Orphaned because of Whitfield's death. And the poem is both a eulogy. Eulogy means praise. When somebody dies, you have an eulogy. Eulogy means you talk about the, you know, achievements and then the kindness and the benevolence of somebody who is dead. That is a eulogy. Praise. It is also an elegy, lamenting, feeling, expressing sorrow at the death of an individual. In this case, George Whitfield. Okay, I think yeah, the rest you can look up. Can you see the presentation?
No, sir.
No?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, now you can. Yeah. Now, when lilacs last in the dooryard bloom, I left out the complete poem, the title. But before I start, let me ask you one thing. Do you have the text of this poem with you? In the
Yes,
just
sir.
check for a second.
Yes, sir.
The poem is there.
Oh, Captain, my Captain, sir.
Then when lilacs last, there is another poem.
Yes, sir. When
Sir,
lilac last in the dooryard bloom.
Okay, read the first line.
When lilacs last in the dooryard bloom, and the great star early drooped in the western sky.
Right. Thank you. That's the poem. Okay, good. I just wanted to make certain that you have the poem with you. Well, Now, when lilacs last in the dooryard bloomed by Walt Whitman, Walter Whitman. Walt is a diminutive, meaning a shortening form. Let me just tell you, most of you know that. See, Bill Clinton, what is the full name? Or Bill Gates, what is the full name? William Gates, William Clinton. Are you able to understand that? So, Billy, Bill means William. Bess, Liz, Lizzie, Betty, Betsy for Elizabeth. Tom, Tim for Thomas. Okay. So, Catherine, Kate. These are called the diminutives, shortened, names. So, Walter Whitman, don't get confused. Think that what is he talking about? We have Walt Whitman, but he is talking about Walter Whitman. Walter Whitman and Walt Whitman both are one and the same person. 1819 to 1892. Now, I got these two photographs of Walt Whitman. Of course, there are photographs of him when he was younger also, but the size was too big for me to put it here. So this is Walt Whitman, the very typical, iconic bearded, sage-like poet. See, sometimes when you think of Tagore, Tagore's photographs are always with his beard, right? He looks like a sage. Yes or no?
Recording stopped.
Excuse me.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Right.
Recording
Tagore,
in progress.
what is the recording in progress? Recording stop. Okay.
Because
Yeah.
host make you co-host, sir.
Pardon?
Yes.
Host make you as co-host.
Okay. So yeah. Right. No problem. Yeah. So Tagore, when you think of Tagore, you have an iconic portrayal. So this is Walt Whitman. When you think of America, you think of Walt Whitman. America and Whitman are inseparable. Okay. Now, was born in Long Island, New York. New York was earlier called New Amsterdam. New Amsterdam was the name because it was bought from the Dutch. It was a Dutch settlement. So he was born in New York, Long Island. See, New York has many islands around. Okay, it's an amazing landscape. Okay, it's an amazing city. Some of you might have seen New York. Okay, especially when you are landing at the JFK International Airport, and you almost are. It appears as though you have touched the waters while landing. It's a collection of many islands, and New York is a city of bridges. Many of you must have seen it in films also. New York is a city of bridges, and one of the oldest cities in America. Some of the buildings are still functional. I mean, you think that they are new, but no, they are not new. They are somewhere around 200, 300 years old buildings. Still, people, they are used as offices and residential apartments. Okay? Now, born in New York and died in New Jersey, close by. Okay. New York also is a city. New York also is the name of a state. You must understand that. New York also is a state. Now, a poet, essayist, and a journalist. And he has been a great influence on every major American poet. Every American poet wrote in relationship to Whitman. And the greatest of his publications is Leaves of Grass, which came out in 1855. And one of the most famous poems in the Leaves of Grass is Song of Myself. It's a 1300 line poem. It's a very long poem, Song of Myself, which has 52 sections. So when you are writing about Walt Whitman in the examination, please mention he is an author of Leaves of Grass. I'm sorry, I could not put it in italics. One thing that you remember, that titles of books must be in italics and names of poems must be in quotation marks. If you say, when lilacs last in the dooryard bloom, you should put it in quotations. But when you say Leaves of Grass, in the examination, you may ask, sir, how do we write it in italics? Do we need to write slanted? No, not necessary. You don't need to go to those, take that pain. You just underline. Titles of books must be underlined. Have I made myself clear?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think some of you know this already. Yeah, but I need to, many still don't follow this, okay? You have to underline the title of a book and also put the name of an essay or a story, a shorter one, essay, story, and poem in quotation marks. What is unique about Whitman is the unconventional and expansive language and subject. To read Whitman is to read America. To read Whitman means he writes about so many things. He writes about the Negro slave, he writes about a prostitute, he writes about a Jew, he writes about an Arab, he writes about a Chinaman, Chinese, he writes about Manhattan, he writes about New York, he writes about Manhattan, Brooklyn, okay, the rivers, the oceans, the forests, the mountains, the farmers, the cattle, Whitman's range is so elaborate. Sometimes you feel so tired reading Whitman. When you read Whitman, he writes so much and about so many things. And this is unconventional. It has not been done in Britain. It has not been done in Europe. But Whitman is called the poet of America because we all know that America is called a very young, nation. And Whitman voiced, the spirit of America through his poetry. So when you read Emerson's American Scholar, the Divinity School Address and American Scholar especially, what America is looking for, what kind of literature is America looking for? Can it replicate what happened in Europe or what was written in England? Whitman seems to have found an answer by writing in a unique new medium. So unconventional and expansive, not only language, but also subjects. And he wrote in free verse, meaning this was before modernism, before the 20th century, before T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, and others. Free verse is, it is not in meters. And but Whitman could write wonderfully in free verse. 1865, Drum Taps. It's a collection of war poems. Now, the poem, When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloom, Oh Captain, My Captain, all of them come from Drum Taps. 1865, a very amazing piece of work, remembered for his very, very poetic, evocative rendition of the trauma, the horror of war. Now he is called the poet of American democracy. He is the poet of America. And he said, this is what Whitman himself says in his preface to Leaves of Grass. The United States themselves are essentially the greatest poem. What does he say? The United States themselves are essentially the greatest poem. Meaning, he says that the United States has so much of variety. There are so many new things about America that it itself is a poem. It's the greatest poem, says Whitman. And if America is the greatest poem, as he says, then Whitman as a greatest poet of America, of that reality. If you are interested in knowing more about Whitman, okay, you can go to this website. Can anyone read the website that I mentioned?
WhitmanArchive.org, University of Nebraska.
Thank you. Whitman Archive, WhitmanArchive.org. It is maintained by, it's a digital commons library maintained by the University of Nebraska and also the University of Virginia. So it's linked to these universities, University of Nebraska. Whitman Archive, manuscripts, photographs, lectures, videos, books, news, everything about Whitman is on this site. So whoever is interested can access. And see, by the time Whitman was writing, recording technology also was introduced for the first time. So they would record voice on cylinders, on the wax cylinders. So those recordings are also available. YouTube, you can Google, you will find archive.org also, that Whitman reading his own poetry. Of course, there is a lot of noise, because of the recording techniques. This was in, 1850s, 60s, and 70s. Have I made my point clear? Right?
Yes, sir.
So the simple reason is that America is a continent. It's not simply a country. It is a continent. And one of the largest continents. And there is so much of geographical variation, right? You have mighty mountains, okay? Deserts, then springs, mighty rivers, okay? Mighty rivers, Tennessee, River Mississippi, okay? Great Lakes in the north, okay? The Great Lakes. So in this context, see, some of you remember Damodar Valley project in India?
Yeah.
Damodar Valley project, right?
Yes, sir.
Now see, Dr. Ambedkar, he, undertook a study when in America of the Tennessee Valley project. And he was on the Viceroy's, council. And he told the Viceroy that a British engineer cannot undertake this project because in Britain there are no mighty rivers. Whereas in America has already experimented with this multi-purpose project. And he saw to it there were American engineers in the Damodar Valley project. So why I brought this is that many don't know about the contribution of Ambedkar to the irrigation water system. It is there on the website, okay? The government website, you can find it from Damodar Valley project. Tennessee, Mississippi, okay? Great waterfalls, woods, forests, trees, and it's amazing. You can't see people around when you are, you don't see people miles or miles together. Well, I'll talk about it when I talk about Robert Frost. Okay. Now, so this amazing reality of America, because you are students of American literature, and without understanding Whitman, you cannot, I think, maybe claim that you were a student of American literature, right? Now, coming to the poem, what is the poem? First poem is, I'm not going to talk about "Oh Captain, My Captain," but I'll go to "When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloom." That is the poem. Turn to that poem, all of you, I think. Now, this is called the Lincoln Memorial. This is the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., District of Columbia, because Washington also is a state in America. This is the Washington District of Columbia. It's a city. Most of you know that this is where the, it is where you have the American Capitol, the White House, the Supreme Court, okay, and all the museums, everything is there. And it is there in the same complex. This is called the National Mall. I have already told you. Yes or no? How many remember National Mall? MALL. National Mall is not a commercial complex, as you understand. National Mall is the whole complex of these buildings is called National Mall. This is Lincoln's Memorial. Behind that, you have the River Potomac. Okay. This is the statue of Lincoln in marble. Some of you must have visited it. Okay. Some of you must have seen it. I have seen it. Okay. So it's a huge marble edifice. Okay. And Lincoln is remembered as one of the most loved and respected presidents of the United States. Okay, I don't need to tell you about Lincoln. Washington, this is Lincoln Memorial. Now, this poem is an elegy on Lincoln. 1809 to 1865, Lincoln was assassinated. Okay. Now, little bit about Lincoln's life. All of you know about Lincoln being, a frontiersman, son, born in Kentucky. It's not Kentucky. We all know KFC. KFC, all of you are familiar with, right?
Yes.
Yeah. It is not Kentucky. It is, the accent is on the second syllable. It is called Kentucky. Kentucky is a state. So Kentucky Fried Chicken, you all know, because Colonel Sanders, okay, that old man whose picture you see whenever you go to KFC, I don't know, because of COVID, I don't think KFC, I don't know, maybe only takeaways. I have not been to any of these KFCs past many years. He was born in Kentucky, and 16th President of the United States. I already referred to John Ford's important film called Young Mr. Lincoln. Lincoln was also called Honest Lincoln. Honest Abe, he was called. And he did much to bring the North and South together. And his Emancipation Proclamation, some of you mentioned it in my earlier class, freeing the slaves, and then keeping the nation together, the Civil War, the bloody Civil War. And see, there are so many cultural productions of this particular time. Those of you are familiar with this novel called, what is this novel? Gone with the Wind. Margaret Mitchell. Anyone here remembers the novel? Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the Wind. It is about the South during the Civil War. It was also made into a wonderful film by David Selznick. It's one of the iconic films of the Civil War, Gone with the Wind. Anyway, if you have occasion, it's, I think, available on YouTube. You can watch it. Culturally significant film and that's why it's preserved in the Library of Congress. Library of Congress in US, it identifies certain books, certain cultural productions as worth preserving for future generations. So Selznick's Gone with the Wind is one such film. Now, students of American literature, I think, need to acquaint themselves with some of these. Birth of a Nation is another film, okay, by Griffiths, D.W. Griffiths, Birth of a Nation. Well, now, he was assassinated, we all know. John Wilkes Booth, a Southerner, assassinated Lincoln when he was in the, when he was watching a play in the theater. This was few days after the second inauguration. You can also watch Steven Spielberg's film, Lincoln, 2012. I think some of you are familiar with it, right? Steven Spielberg's film, Lincoln, 2012. Right. He was the first president to be assassinated. Okay, and millions followed his funeral train from Washington to Illinois, Springfield. He was born in Kentucky, but he was from Springfield, Illinois. So the funeral, train traveled through different parts of America. Washington is in the north, Illinois is down, okay? So that long journey was attended by millions of people, okay? And then, okay, I asked you to listen to beautiful, spacious skies. Why? Because when you are reading this poem, this hymn makes sense. This is an elegy. Don't mind the font. I forgot to change the font. I usually use Calibri, font size 20, but this was something else. Yeah. Now, it's an elegy. It's a pastoral elegy in a sense, where nature moves. Okay. And elegy is basically a personal response, but it is also universal. From the particular, an elegy moves to the universe. Lycidas by John Milton is written about the death of Edward King, but it's not only about Edward King, but about death in general. Okay. So when you think about an elegy, think of elegies like an elegy written in a country churchyard, Thyrsis by Matthew Arnold, okay, Adonis by Shelley. An elegy expresses grief, loss, but also an affirmation of life. It's not simply crying and weeping and all that. There is a hope in an elegy. This particular elegy by Walt Whitman is considered operatic. I don't know, because it's a mixed group that I'm addressing. I don't know how, what your contexts are. So opera is a form, is a musical form in Western classical traditions, where basically it is music and drama together. That is an opera. A story is involved in an opera. And there is costume, there is and song and music. So an opera has what are songs in an opera are called a character singing a song in an opera. It's not opera, please. It's not opera, it's opera. Okay. So in an opera, you have what is called an aria, not area, aria, from which comes the word air. A-I-R means a song, which comes from aria. And in an opera, there is a recitative. Recitative means a singer doesn't actually sing a melody, but sings a description. This is different from a melody. So in an opera, you have a recitative. Of course, a recitative is there in an oratorio also. And the poem, it is said by critics that Whitman writes symphonically. Whitman writes symphonically. So there is a symphonic structure to Whitman's When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloom. And toward the end of the slide, I refer to Paul Hindemith. Paul Hindemith is an American composer who composed a requiem, who composed music called Requiem based on the elegy, sorry, When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloom. So Paul Hindemith set the poem of Walt Whitman to music in his work called the Requiem. Okay, the word Requiem is a Latin term meaning Requiem aeternam dona eis Domini, meaning give them eternal rest, O Lord. Okay, that is our translation. But usually we use the only first initial one or two words in a phrase. That becomes a kind of a idiomatic expression or sometimes, right? Now, this is one of the 4 elegies which are entitled Memories of President Lincoln. One is, can anyone read this for me before, because I'll have some water, please.
Memories of President.
One of the 4 elegies.
Go ahead.
One of the 4 elegies entitled Memories of President Lincoln. O Captain, my Captain, hush to be the camps today. This dust was once man. Poem in 16 sections. The elegy parallels a symphonic structure.
Thank you, Ma. Now, there are 4 elegies. O Captain, my Captain, hushed be the camps today. This dust was once man, and when lilacs last in the dooryard bloom. These are the 4 elegies which Walt Whitman wrote. So this particular poem, okay, is in a symphonic structure. It is supposed to have a symphonic structure. You have the text with you, so let us just quickly go over it. I'll just, one of you please read this for the sake of understanding. This is just for your understanding, okay? Not that you need to think about it, worry about it in the examination. No, not that. Just to give you an idea of what a symphony is, so that if you want, you can understand this in that particular context. Yeah, one of you please read it.
A symphony is a large-scale orchestral work intended to play in the concert hall.
Excuse me. There is a background voice coming from your end, I think. Who is this reading?
Yeah, it is Sailaja, sir. My son is taking the classes parallelly, sir, with me.
Okay, so yeah, let somebody else read, because it will be disturbing him also, right? Yeah.
A symphony is a large-scale orchestral work intended to be played in the concert hall. It is usually in 4 movements. The standard classical form is first movement allegro, fast in sonata form. Second movement slow. Third movement minuet, a dance with minuet, a dance with 3 beats in a bar. Fourth movement allegro. The first movement is in sonata form. The sonata form has 3 main sections: exposition, development, and recapitulation. Sonata form. Most of the musical ideas come from 2 contrasting themes heard in the exposition. In the exposition, the material is exposed, which means presented for the first time. There are 2 main melodies known as the first and second subject.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for reading that. Now, just don't get into the technicalities. Just try to understand that a symphony usually has 4 movements. A symphony is a large-scale orchestral work. You cannot have a symphony with 3 or 4 instruments or 5, 10 instruments. A symphony requires, okay, minimum 100 instruments, okay, and they are not playing the same thing together. Sometimes we make a mistake because we think that all instruments, there are 150 veenas or 150 violins playing the same melody. That is not symphony. Symphony involves many melodies played together, because Western classical music is based on the principle of harmony and counterpoint, whereas Indian classical music is based on melodic structure, meaning a sequence of notes. A raga is a sequence of notes, combinations and permutations of those notes, okay? That is a raga. Whereas in a symphony, in the Western classical music, you have notes against notes. The right hand plays melody, the left hand would play the counterpoint or harmony in a piano. So each section, is played by a set of instruments. You have the violas, the first violins, the second violins, the cellos, the double basses, the woodwind section, the brass section. That is, brass section means the trumpets and all. The woodwinds means the clarinets, the bassoons, the flutes. Then you have the timpani section. Timpani means you have the percussion section. Timpani is the drums, okay, the snare drums, the kettle drums, okay, and then the cymbals, the gongs, all kinds of things. Then there is a harp. Sometimes you have an organ also. So try to imagine what is a symphony. Don't simply think that a symphony means few instruments playing the same thing again and again. Okay. Yeah. So there are movements, first, second, fourth movement. One thing that I want to understand in when lilacs last in the lower bloom is this, that there's an exposition, there's a development, there's a recapitulation. Okay. Exposition, development, and recapitulation. For you to understand this, okay, try listening to okay. Got it?
Beethoven.
Beethoven Symphony 9. Okay, you will understand what is meant by exposition. Some theme is exposed, the themes are developed, and the theme is recapitulated. The same thing happens when lilacs last in the lower bloom. Certain images, certain symbols keep appearing again and again in different forms, undergoing a transformation. They themselves undergo a transformation, and they also, in their relationship with other themes, they exert an influence. So it's a kind of a two-way influence, one acting on the other. So yeah, first subject, second subject, and all that. Yeah, just forget about it. Okay, just a second. Yeah, I think just let me know if you can. Just a second. Where am I? No, I thought I would be able to do that. Anyway, don't worry. Now the poem is in terms of cycles. So at least you can identify 4 cycles in the poem. The first cycle, okay, sections 1 to 4. Now the setting is, I'll talk about it and then stop here. We'll complete the other poems in the next class. Now, what is the scene? One of you can read out from the book that you have.
Book, sir.
The first few lines. Yeah, I'm waiting. Nobody wants to read it.
When lilacs last in the dooryard.
Just a second. Lilacs.
Sorry, sir. When lilacs last in the dooryard bloomed, and the great star early drooped in the western sky in the night, I mourned, and yet shall mourn with ever returning spring. Ever returning spring. Trinity sure to me you bring. Lilac blooming perennial, and drooping star in the west, and thought of him I love.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, the first, I'm trying to locate it here. Now, lilacs is a flower. Okay, I'll just go to here. Now, the first section of the poem introduces the 3 principal symbols. Now, in the examination, you need to remember this. What are the symbols? Can you read out? The lilacs, the stars,
The
and
thrush bird.
the thrush, that is the bird. Now, the lilac is a flower, which is, the color of lilac is purple. And it symbolizes, in many traditions, love, and also it is identified with Easter. Can anyone tell me what Easter symbolizes?
Resurrection, sir.
Resurrection. Yeah, Easter. Now, this Easter usually comes in April, right? Okay, that is a time of spring. So the poem introduces the theme of love, rejuvenation, that is coming to life again, and affirmation. So there are 2 things here: love, affirmation of life. And death is not yet, suggested, because he says, when lilacs last in the dooryard bloom, and the great star early drooped in the western sky in the night, I mourn, and yet shall mourn with ever returning spring. Now, the first 3 lines, I will mourn, and I will mourn with ever returning spring. See, lilac, star, and the thrush. These 3 symbols appear again and again in different forms throughout this long elegy. Now, when Whitman or the speaker says, I shall mourn with ever returning spring. Spring will return. Now this spring will again be followed by other seasons, and then again spring will come. So in nature, there is this ever returning spring. But in life, is it possible? Do we get to see our dear ones, beloved ones again? Yes or no? Maybe you're all taking a nap in the morning, or
Yes, sir.
do we see them again?
Sir,
No.
we cannot see.
We cannot see, right? So, I mean, spring comes and goes, but one who is dead, him I mourn. Now, who is he that he is mourning? He is mourning President Lincoln, who was assassinated. Okay, I think I'll, just hold on to this. Spring, lilacs. Lilacs are heart-shaped. Okay, this is something that you need to keep. Heart-shaped leaves. Yeah, I think I'll stop there and then come back to you tomorrow, and we shall discuss the rest of the poems. Okay.